The Essence of Learning, presented by Jessica O'Driscoll on January 14, 2016. The location of this presentation is at Clifton, New Jersey. To begin, let's meet the presenter of this visual presentation, Jessica O'Driscoll. I am a Jersey girl, and I am from Kearney, but I grew up in Woodbridge and graduated from Woodbridge High School in 2004. Continuing with my education at Montclair State University, I had graduated with a bachelor's degree in health and physical education in 2009. After searching for a job position, I had started my career at Beckton Regional High School in East Rutherford, New Jersey in 2010. I am currently in my 6th year of teaching at Beckton Regional High School. In addition, I coach JV volleyball and advise the junior class and the prom. Lastly, I had recently decided to further my education at Walden University in the Teacher Leadership Program. My goals are to become a more effective leader as an educator and colleague. This visual presentation is going to explain and demonstrate the history and background of learning, why teaching should be directed towards students' learning needs, and why the brain is so significant to memory and association. It has been researched by many that learning is a significant aspect of teaching, and in order to excel as an educator, one must understand how people learn. Students are different in many ways from one another, including how they hear, view, and process information. Looking back on the history of the learning process, Beers explained that children learn from their parents and what was expected of them. He stated, "People learn by finding someone who knew more than they did." Examples of this theory are girls observing their mothers cook while boys were observing their fathers hunt. Children were taught what their parents felt they needed to know in order to survive and live because that was what they felt was important. Over time, the Industrial Revolution changed this model of learning by implementing what was known as the factory line. This approach suggested that students were expected to now follow rituals that were proven to be effective. These skills included reading, writing, and calculating. A very popular learning theory was known as behaviorism. Behavior theorists had studied observable behaviors and noticed an increase in learning through conditioning. They used the term operant conditioning to describe this theory. Basically, behaviors would be trained by the influence of rewards and punishments. With this theory, teaching was not based on how a student understood what was taught, but how to increase and decrease certain behaviors of that student. One example that teachers used were grades. In order to receive the behaviors that they wanted and for students to do well, they would provide higher grades. Students that did not do well would receive low grades to enhance their motivation to do better. However, Beers expressed his concerns and thoughts of this theory. He explained how embarrassed and unmotivated most students would become. Dr. Wolf shared Dr. Beers' feelings towards behaviorism. She discussed this reinforcement method as a poor foundation for education. If a student cannot read, no matter how many positive reinforcements you use in hopes to receive the behavior that you want, that student is still not going to be able to read. These positive reinforcements and rewards are not teaching the student to read. Although this method might work for some behaviors, it is not the solution for learning. It had been concluded that in order to truly understand how students learn, we must conduct brain research, a scientific validation for teaching and learning. Brain research can facilitate a shift in the focus from teaching to learning. By figuring out how a person absorbs information, educators can then provide teaching styles that will increase their students' education. Now let's take a look at how the brain functions. The brain is made up of 4 lobes. The frontal lobe is the largest and located on the forehead. Its functions include voluntary movement, speech, and intellectual thoughts. The prefrontal cortex is found here as well and controls the memory and personality of a person. The parietal lobe is divided into 2 functional regions. Its function is to interpret signals from all areas of the brain at once. It controls the vision, memory, hearing, and motor sensory skills. The occipital lobe is located on the back of the brain. It receives and processes any visual information and influences how we process colors and shapes. The temporal lobes are located on each side of the brain. They assist in visual memory, such as faces, verbal memory, such as the languages we speak, and interprets emotions and reactions. The brain is in charge of our memory and how we retain material. Memory is being able to reactivate a connection that you had already learned. There are two different types of memory. The first is known as procedural. This type of memory is unconscious and considered to be a habit or skill. Your brain already knows this information. An example of this type of memory would be driving to work. Because you drive to work on most days of the week, you become so familiar with the route that you do not need any instructions on how to get there. The second type of memory is known as declarative. This type of memory is being able to remember episodes and concepts through elaborative rehearsal. Through the use of music, rhymes, drawings, and diagrams, you will be able to remember information because of your declarative memory. An example of this type of memory is remembering what you ate for lunch. A memory is vital in the learning and teaching process. There are a few ways that you can strengthen a memory. One idea is making a mental visualization of the terms and events that you encounter. Another idea is making connections and associating what is being learned to your own experiences from your everyday life. As a teacher, I have utilized these strategies by relating topics to my students' cultures and interests, such as sports, family, and hobbies. How does sleep and exercise relate to learning? Recently, research has shown that the brain regions in learning the day before are reactivated during sleep. This research scanned the brain for activity while it was learning and then scanned the brain during sleep. The experiment proved that REM sleep reinforces learning that took place that day. It had proved that participants involved in this test had improved their performance the next day due to their memory of what they had learned. The explanation of these results is that during the brain reactivations, the neurons would work together and connect for that task and incorporate into a long-term memory. Receiving enough sleep each night is very imperative in the learning process. On the other hand, exercise can affect the brain by increasing one's knowledge. Emerging new research in animals suggests that physical exercise may boost brain function and increase learning. The hippocampus is the brain region responsible for learning and memory. A study had used mice and the hippocampus of mice while running on a wheel to demonstrate their increase of knowledge in comparison to the mice that were sedated with no wheel. This experiment proved that the mice on the wheel was almost double of those that were not and at rest. Being a health and physical education teacher, I constantly promote a healthy lifestyle by encouraging my students to eat healthy and exercise when possible. Now that we know how the brain functions, let's move forward to the current trends in learning. Current trends in learning are based off of how much students can learn, not how best they can learn. There are two categories that explain how people take in information. The first are perceivers. Perceivers are those that learn through concrete or abstract learning. Concrete learning is gaining knowledge through experiences and by doing. In this area, students learn better by participating and performing. Abstract learning is retaining information through observation. Students receive a better understanding of material by watching others perform tasks. The second category are processors, which explain how a person uses the information that was perceived. There are two types of processors, active and reflective. Active processors are those that use the information as soon as they experience it. Reflective processors are people that comprehend material better by thinking about the learned information before using it. These four types of learners all obtain information, but through different practices. Imitation is a key method of learning that teachers tend to use in their instruction. This method is a learning by observation tool that is followed by the student performing the same task. It has been researched that the brain's motor regions have increased when observing someone's actions, followed by imitating them later on. While observing each student's demonstrations, the teacher is able to observe and obtain feedback on what they have learned and what they need to be retaught. An example of this technique is when an elementary school teacher is instructing their class on how to write the letters of the alphabet. First, the teacher will exhibit the correct way to write a specific letter by drawing it on the board and carefully explaining through easy instructions. After a few demonstrations, the class will then be given lined paper to practice writing the same letter on their own. This strategy is very helpful to students that are visual learners and those that are active processors. In both my health and physical education classes, I utilize the imitation model in many ways. An instance that I would like to share is my lesson on the correct technique of shooting an arrow in archery. In this lesson, I instruct my students on the proper terminology and form when shooting an arrow at a target. I begin the class by expressing the importance of safety and then continue with the correct form using step-by-step instructions. After demonstrating a couple of times, I then have my students practice what they have observed and learned through the imitation method. This method allows us to switch positions where I become the observer and they perform the task. Throughout their performance, I am there to help guide them through because it is a learning process. In 1983, Howard Gardner shared his theories on learning on what he called multiple intelligences. Through research and observation, he found that people learned in many different ways. There are 8 different areas that people naturally learn best from. These include the following intelligences: verbal and linguistics. This intelligence uses languages to present ideas and express feelings. Logical and mathematical. This intelligence uses reasonings and mathematical problems. Visual and spatial. This intelligence has the ability to create and interpret images. Bodily and kinesthetic. This intelligence involves hands-on work and expressing feelings. Musical. This intelligence is the ability to create and feel a rhythm. Intrapersonal. This intelligence is understanding yourself and your own thoughts and feelings. Interpersonal. This intelligence is the ability to understand the needs and feelings of others. And naturalist. This intelligence is the ability to understand nature and be able to classify things. These multiple intelligences provide the idea that students do not all learn in the same way. There are differences among us all, and this includes in our learning habits. As teachers, we are responsible for observing and learning about our students. Given the feedback that teachers receive, they can implement instruction that accommodates and applies to their students. I am a teacher practitioner, and as I further my career, I try to incorporate different teaching methods based off of how my students learn. Based off of Gardner's multiple intelligences, I have exhibited teaching strategies that apply to many of these. I ask questions to receive answers from those that have verbal and linguistic intelligences. In my health classes, I use PowerPoint presentations, handouts, and pictures for those that are visually intelligent. My first aid and CPR classes complete a lot of hands-on activities with the CPR dummies, which applies to my kinesthetic intelligent students. I have given group projects using computers to create brochures, PowerPoints, and newsletters. These assignments are geared towards students with interpersonal and kinesthetic intelligences. Another example is when I have my students create a song or rap relating to health topics. This assignment is based for my students that are musically intelligent. Lastly, all of my physical education classes demonstrate a number of these intelligences. Students work in teams or individually in activities. They observe instructions on how to perform skills, and then they practice these skills. By providing different teaching methods with my students, I am illustrating that I understand the differences between my students' learning abilities. In conclusion, over the years, learning and teaching have been under the microscope to figure out what is best for today's education. In order to become successful in teaching, educators need to know how their students learn. Methods such as behaviorism is not the solution. Beer stated, "The skillful teacher motivates the students to increase their learning without threats or punishment." By understanding how the brain works and being knowledgeable of Gardner's multiple intelligences, an educator can develop instruction and assessments that encourage and motivate students to learn and do well. Memory is different from memorizing. Students that memorize information are not learning the material. However, students that obtain the information through association, experience, imitation, and observation are able to remember material due to their memory. Furthermore, as we continue to study topics on learning and teaching and observe the ways that our students comprehend material, the more effective teachers will be and the more knowledge our students will obtain.
Sometimes I get a good feeling, yeah.